The howl of wind across the frozen mountains of northern Arizona territory carried death in its breath, and Zelda Kincaid knew she would not survive the night unless a miracle found her on this desolate trail. She huddled beneath the skeletal branches of a juniper tree, her body racked with contractions that tore through her middle like jagged lightning. Snow fell in thick curtains around her, transforming the narrow mountain path into a white tomb. Her horse had thrown a shoe 3 miles back and bolted when a mountain lion screamed from the rocks above. Her husband, Thomas, lay dead somewhere behind her on this cursed journey, killed 2 days ago by outlaws who had ambushed their wagon on the road from Flagstaff. They had taken everything except the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her, a life that now demanded to enter this frozen world, whether she was ready or not. Zelda pressed her back against the rough bark of the tree and bit down on the leather strap of her satchel to muffle her screams. She was 22 years old, alone on a mountain trail in January of 1882, and her baby was coming whether the world was prepared to receive it or not. The pain built like a wave, cresting and breaking, and she bore down with everything she had left. Her fingers clawed at the frozen ground, scraping through snow to find purchase in the half-frozen earth beneath. Time lost all meaning in that white wilderness. There was only pain and cold, and the desperate animal instinct to survive. When the baby finally slipped free into her trembling hands, Zelda sobbed, with a mixture of relief and terror. The infant was silent, blue-tinged and still in the frigid air. With shaking fingers, she cleared the tiny mouth and nose, then pulled the child against her chest beneath her coat, using her own body heat to warm the fragile life she had just brought into the world. "Breathe," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Please, baby, breathe." A weak cry answered her prayer, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. Zelda wrapped her shawl around the infant, tucking the fabric tight to preserve every bit of warmth. She leaned back against the tree trunk, exhausted beyond measure, and felt the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. The snow continued to fall, covering her legs, her lap, building small drifts against her sides. She knew she should move, should try to find shelter, but her body had nothing left to give. As consciousness slipped away, Zelda pulled her baby closer and whispered a prayer into the howling wind. Kade Oliver had been tracking the mountain lion for 3 days when he spotted the dark shape beneath the juniper tree. At first, he thought it was just a shadow or perhaps a fallen log, but his horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Banner, snorted and stamped nervously. Kade pulled his wool-lined coat tighter and urged Banner forward through the deep snow. They were 20 miles north of Fort Bowie, in country where few travelers ventured during winter months, and finding another human being out here was the last thing he expected. As they drew closer, Cade's heart seized in his chest. It was a woman, half buried in snow, her face pale as death itself. He was off his horse before Banner fully stopped, his boots sinking deep into the powder as he rushed to her side. She was alive. Barely, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Then he saw the bundle clutched against her chest, and his breath caught in his throat. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, dropping to his knees beside her. A baby. She was holding a baby. Kade was 26 years old, a ranch hand who had spent the last 8 years working cattle and breaking horses for the army post at Fort Bowie. He had seen men die on the trail, had pulled drowning calves from spring floods, and had once helped deliver a foal when the mare was struggling. But he had never encountered anything like this. A woman alone on a frozen mountain trail, a newborn infant in her arms, both of them minutes from death. He acted on instinct. First, he checked the woman for a pulse, finding it weak but steady beneath her jaw. Then he gently eased back the shawl to look at the baby. The infant was breathing, its tiny chest rising and falling, but its lips held a blue tinge that spoke of dangerous cold. Cade stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around both mother and child, then lifted them as carefully as he could. The woman weighed almost nothing in his arms, and he realized with a jolt that she could not have given birth long ago. The evidence was all around them in the disturbed snow and the dark stains on her skirts. "You are one hell of a strong woman," he said softly, even though she could not hear him. "Hang on. Just hang on for me." Banner stood steady as Cade, carefully mounted with his precious cargo, settling the woman across his lap with her baby still clutched to her chest. He had a camp about a mile back down the trail, where he had set up a canvas lean-to and built a fire ring. It was not much, but it was shelter, and shelter meant the difference between life and death in these mountains. The ride back felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes. Cade kept his arms tight around the woman and child, using his own body to shield them from the worst of the wind. He talked to them constantly, not sure if his words made any difference, but unable to bear the silence. "Almost there now," he said. "Got a good fire going, plenty of wood stacked up. Got coffee too, and salt pork, and cornmeal for Johnny cakes. Not fancy, but it will keep body and soul together. You just keep breathing for me, both of you." When they reached his camp, Cade worked with swift efficiency. He had kept the fire banked, and it roared back to life when he added fresh wood. He spread his bedroll close to the flames and laid the woman down on it, keeping the baby nestled against her chest. He had 2 spare blankets in his pack, and he piled both over them. Then he filled his coffee pot with snow and set it to heat, knowing they would need warm liquids as soon as possible. As the water heated, Cade crouched beside the woman and studied her face. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Even pale and unconscious, with her dark hair matted with snow and her lips chapped from cold, there was something striking about her features. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, thick lashes that lay against her cheeks like fans. But more than her beauty, there was something in the set of her mouth, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of determination and courage. "Who are you?" he wondered aloud. "And how in the hell did you end up out here?" The woman stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. Cade immediately leaned closer, touching her shoulder gently. "Easy now. You are safe. You and your baby both." Her eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. They were a deep brown, the color of good earth after rain. She looked at him without recognition, then down at the bundle against her chest. Her arms tightened protectively around the infant. "My baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Your baby is fine," Kate assured her quickly. "Breathing good and strong. You did it. You brought that child into the world all by yourself." Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dirt and exhaustion on her face. "Thomas. They killed Thomas." Cade felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Your husband?" She nodded weakly, her eyes already closing again. "Outlaws. Took everything. I ran, had to run." "Where did this happen?" 2 days ago, maybe 3. "I do not know anymore." Her words slurred together as she drifted back toward unconsciousness. "So cold." "I know. But you are warming up now. Going to get some warm water in you. Then some food. You need to keep your strength up for that baby." She did not respond, already asleep again. Cade sat back on his heels and ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to process what he had just learned. Outlaws had killed her husband and left her for dead. She had somehow made it 3 days on foot, heavily pregnant, through some of the most unforgiving country in the territory. And she had given birth alone on a frozen mountain trail. "Hell of a woman," he muttered again. Over the next hours, Cade tended to his unexpected guests with the same care he would give to injured livestock, though with considerably more gentleness. When the water was warm, he lifted the woman's head and coaxed small sips past her lips. She stirred enough to drink, which he took as a good sign. The baby woke and began to cry, a thin wailing sound that cut through the mountain silence. The woman's eyes opened again, more focused this time, and she brought the infant to her breast with movements made clumsy by exhaustion and cold. Cade turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with making a thin gruel from cornmeal and water. It was not much, but it would provide sustenance without taxing her weakened system. He added a bit of salt and a precious spoonful of honey he had been saving, then set it aside to cool. "Thank you," came the woman's soft voice behind him. He turned back to find her watching him, the baby now quiet at her breast. In the firelight, her face had regained some color, though she still looked like she had been through hell and back. "No need for thanks," Cade said. "Any one would do the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. You saved our lives." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "What is your name?" Zelda Kincaid. And this is my daughter." She looked down at the baby with an expression of such fierce love that it made Cade's chest ache. "I'm going to name her Grace because that is what this is. Pure grace." "It is a good name," Cade said. "I am Kade Oliver. I work at Fort Bowie, about 20 miles south of here." "Fort Bowie," Zelda repeated, and something flickered in her eyes. "Relief, perhaps. I was trying to get there. My husband and we were traveling from Flagstaff. He had a job waiting at the fort, working with the quartermaster." "What happened?" Cade asked gently. Zelda's face crumpled, and she took a shaky breath before speaking. "3 days ago, we were on the road. 4 men stopped us. They had guns. Thomas tried to reason with them, told them we did not have much, but they did not care. They shot him. Just shot him like he was nothing, like his life meant nothing." Her voice broke, and she clutched Grace tighter. "They took our wagon, our supplies, everything. I ran into the rocks, and they did not follow. Maybe they thought I would die out there anyway. They nearly got their wish," Cade said grimly. "You should not have survived what you went through." "I had to," Zelda said simply. "For her." Cade looked at the baby, at the tiny, perfect face visible above the blankets, and felt something shift in his chest. He had always been a solitary man, content with his horses and his work, never feeling the need for much human company beyond the easy camaraderie of the ranch hands. But looking at this woman and her child, seeing the strength it had taken to survive, something in him responded in a way he had never experienced before. "You need to eat," he said, pushing the feeling aside. "Get some strength back. Then we will figure out what to do next." Over the following days, Zelda slowly regained her strength under Cade's careful ministration. He had supplies enough for 3 people if they were careful, and he proved to be surprisingly adept at caring for both mother and infant. He kept the fire burning constantly, ventured out into the snow to hunt fresh meat, and even fashioned a crude sling from spare cloth so that Zelda could keep Grace close to her body for warmth while keeping her hands free. They talked during the long evenings, sharing stories while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside their shelter. Zelda learned that Cade had come west from Missouri after his parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 18. He had drifted for a while, working ranches and trail drives before settling at Fort Bowie. He was quiet and steady, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her and made her smile despite her grief. Cade learned that Zelda had been a teacher in Flagstaff, that she loved books and music, and that she had married Thomas Kincaid after a brief courtship, drawn to his optimism and his dreams of building a new life in Arizona territory. Her grief over his death was raw and real, and Cade never pushed her to talk about it, simply offering quiet support when she needed to cry. What neither of them spoke about, at least not at first, was the growing awareness between them. It started with small things. The brush of Cade's hand against hers when he passed her a cup of coffee. The way Zelda's eyes followed him when he moved around the camp. The comfortable silence that fell between them, the kind that only comes when 2 people feel safe in each other's presence. On the 5th day after he found her, the weather finally broke. The sun came out, brilliant and blinding against the white landscape, and the temperature rose just enough to make travel possible. Cade knew they needed to get to Fort Bowie, where Zelda and Grace could receive proper care and shelter. But he found himself reluctant to break the spell of their small camp, this bubble of existence where it was just the three of them against the world. We should leave tomorrow, he said that evening, watching Zelda nurse Grace by the firelight. If the weather holds. Zelda nodded, her expression difficult to read. I need to get Grace somewhere safe, somewhere permanent. Fort Bowie has families, Kade said. There will be women there who can help you. And the quartermaster, the one your husband was supposed to work for, he should be told what happened. There might be compensation owed. Blood money, Zelda said softly. I would rather have Thomas. I know. She looked up at him, and the firelight caught in her eyes, making them gleam like polished wood. What will happen to me? To us. I have no money, no home, no family. Thomas was all I had. You will figure it out, Kade said with more confidence than he felt. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You will survive this too. Will I? Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way he had not heard before. I feel like I am barely holding myself together, like if I let go for even a second, I will fall apart completely. Kade moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Then do not let go, not yet, hold on a little longer. Zelda leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that made Kade's heart race. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found us. You would have found a way, Kade said, because that is who you are. They sat like that for a long time, with Grace sleeping between them and the fire warming their faces. Kade knew he was treading dangerous ground. This woman had just lost her husband, had just given birth under the most traumatic circumstances imaginable. The last thing she needed was for him to complicate her life with feelings she might not return and could not possibly sort through in her current state. But sitting there in the firelight, with her head on his shoulder and her baby breathing softly between them, Kade could not deny what he was feeling. It was more than attraction, more than sympathy. It was a bone-deep recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting his whole life to find her. The journey to Fort Bowie took 2 days. Kade fashioned a travois from branches and canvas to carry their supplies, and Zelda rode on Banner with Grace bundled against her chest. They moved slowly, taking frequent breaks to rest and nurse the baby. The weather stayed clear, though bitterly cold, and they made steady progress down out of the mountains. On the afternoon of the second day, they crested a rise and saw the fort spread out below them. It was not much to look at, just a collection of adobe buildings surrounded by a low wall, but to Zelda it looked like salvation. She felt tears prick her eyes at the sight of smoke rising from chimneys, at the knowledge that there were people down there, civilization, safety. Almost there, Kade said, riding up beside her. He had been walking most of the journey, leading Banner and keeping a sharp eye on the trail ahead. I can see it, Zelda said. She looked at him, this man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, and felt her heart constrict. Kade, I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not owe me anything, he said firmly. I am just glad I was there when you needed someone. They rode into Fort Bowie as the sun was setting, painting the adobe walls gold and pink. Soldiers on guard duty called out challenges, then lowered their rifles when they saw a woman and child. Kade explained the situation in terse sentences, and within minutes they were surrounded by people. Women appeared from the buildings, clucking with sympathy and reaching for Grace. The fort's surgeon, a gruff man named Dr. Patterson, insisted on examining both Zelda and the baby immediately. Kade found himself standing alone in the courtyard, watching as Zelda was swept away into one of the buildings. She looked back at him once, her eyes wide and uncertain, and he raised a hand in what he hoped was a reassuring wave. Then she was gone, and he was left with the sudden hollow feeling of her absence. Hell of a thing you did, Oliver, said a voice beside him. Kade turned to find Major Carson, the fort's commander, a weather-beaten man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard. Finding that woman and baby in the mountains. They would have died without you. Just happened to be in the right place, Cade said with a shrug. Right, Carson said dryly. And spent nearly a week caring for them, brought them down safe, asked for nothing in return. Just happened. Sure. Cade did not respond, and Carson chuckled. Come on. You look like you could use a drink and a hot meal. The ladies will take care of Mrs. Kincaid and the baby. You can check on them in the morning. But Cade found he could not sleep that night. He lay in his bunk in the ranch hand's barracks, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Zelda. Was she comfortable? Was Grace all right? Was she scared? Alone in a strange place? He told himself he was being ridiculous, that she was surrounded by helpful people and was far better off than she had been in the mountains. But the worry gnawed at him nonetheless. Just before dawn, unable to stand it any longer, he rose and dressed quietly. The fort was still mostly asleep as he made his way across the courtyard to the building where they had taken Zelda. He stood outside for several minutes, arguing with himself about whether to knock when the door opened and Dr. Patterson emerged. Thought I might find you lurking out here, the doctor said with a knowing look. She is fine, Oliver. Both of them are. The woman is remarkably healthy considering what she went through, and the baby is thriving. Can I see her? Cade asked, then felt foolish for asking. Patterson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She is awake. In fact, she asked about you. Room at the end of the hall. Cade's heart hammered as he walked down the narrow hallway. He knocked softly on the last door, and Zelda's voice called out for him to enter. He pushed the door open to find her sitting up in a narrow bed, Grace asleep in a cradle beside her. She was wearing a clean dress that someone must have loaned her, and her hair was brushed and pinned back. She looked beautiful and impossibly fragile in the morning light, filtering through the small window. Cade, she said, and her whole face lit up with a smile that made his chest ache. I was hoping you would come. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said, suddenly awkward. Both of you. We are fine. More than fine. Dr. Patterson says Grace is perfect, and I am recovering well. The wives here have been so kind. They brought us clothes, blankets, food. I feel like I have been wrapped in a warm embrace. That is good, Cade said. He hovered near the door, unsure whether to come further into the room or leave. I am glad. Sit down, Zelda said, patting the edge of the bed. Please, you look like you are about to bolt. Cade sat carefully, keeping a respectable distance between them. I did not want to intrude. You could never intrude, Zelda said softly. Cade, you saved my life. You saved Grace's life. You cared for us when we had no one else. How could you possibly be intruding? I know you have a lot to deal with, Cade said carefully. Getting settled, figuring out your situation. I do not want to add to your burden. Zelda reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and small in his calloused palm. You are not a burden. You are the opposite of a burden. They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, and Cade felt the rest of the world fall away. It was just the two of them, and the sleeping baby, and the morning light, and the unspoken understanding that something profound had shifted between them. Major Carson said he will investigate what happened to Thomas, Zelda said eventually, her voice quiet. He is going to send men to look for his body, to try to track the outlaws who did this. That is good, Cade said. Those men should answer for what they did. Will it bring Thomas back? Zelda asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, only sorrow. Will it change anything? No, Cade admitted. But it might give you some closure, some sense of justice. Zelda nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. I keep thinking I should feel more. More grief, more anger. But mostly I just feel numb. And guilty. Guilty? Cade asked, surprised. Why guilty? Because part of me is relieved, she whispered, the words clearly costing her. Not that Thomas is dead, never that, but relieved that I survived, that Grace survived, relieved that we are here, safe instead of frozen on that mountain, and I feel terrible for feeling relieved. That is not guilt, Cade said firmly. That is being human. You can grieve your husband and be grateful to be alive at the same time. Those things do not cancel each other out. How did you get so wise? Zelda asked with a watery smile. I am not wise, Cade said. I just know that life is complicated. Feelings are complicated. You are allowed to feel however you feel. Grace stirred in her cradle, making soft mewling sounds. Zelda released Cade's hand to lift the baby, settling her against her chest with practiced ease. Cade watched the tender scene and felt something settle deep in his chest, a certainty, a knowing. He was in love with this woman. The realization should have terrified him. It was too soon, too complicated, too impossible. But instead it felt right, as natural as breathing, as inevitable as sunrise. Over the following weeks, Cade found excuses to visit the fort more often than strictly necessary. He would ride in with messages from the ranch where he worked, or to pick up supplies, or to check on the horses in the cavalry stable, and each time he would find his way to the small house where Zelda had been given a room. The fort's wives had taken her under their collective wing, providing everything she and Grace needed, but Zelda always seemed to light up when Cade appeared at her door. They fell into an easy rhythm. Cade would bring small gifts when he visited. Fresh meat from his hunts, wildflowers he found on the trail, a rattle he carved from wood for Grace. Zelda would make coffee, and they would sit and talk while the baby slept, or nursed, or made the small sounds that newborns make. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they had been, dreams they had for the future. I want to teach again, Zelda said one afternoon, watching Grace sleep in her cradle. Not right away, of course, but someday. I love children. I love helping them learn and grow. You would be a good teacher, Cade said. He was sitting on the floor beside the cradle, his long legs stretched out in front of him. You are patient and kind, and smart as hell. Zelda laughed. Smart as hell, that is quite the compliment. It is the truth, Cade said seriously. You are the smartest person I have ever met. I doubt that is true, Zelda said, but she looked pleased. What about you? What do you want for your future? Cade was silent for a long moment, staring at the baby. I always figured I would keep doing what I am doing, working ranches, breaking horses, maybe save up enough to buy some land of my own someday. Have a few head of cattle, a good string of horses. That sounds like a good life, Zelda said softly. It is a lonely life, Cade said, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. I never minded that before, being alone. But lately I have been thinking maybe I minded it more than I realized. I just did not know any different. Their eyes met across the small room, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Cade wanted to tell her how he felt, wanted to lay his heart bare, but he held back. It was too soon. She was still mourning her husband, still recovering from trauma. The last thing she needed was for him to burden her with his feelings. But Zelda seemed to sense something of what he was thinking. She rose from her chair and crossed to where he sat, settling herself on the floor beside him. Their shoulders touched, and Cade felt the contact like an electric current. I am glad you found us, Zelda said quietly. On that mountain. I know I have said it before, but I do not think you understand how much it means. You gave us our lives back, Cade. You gave us a future. You gave yourself that future, Cade said, by being strong enough to survive. We can both be right, Zelda said with a small smile. She hesitated, then added, Can I tell you something? Anything. When I was out there on that trail, when I was giving birth and I thought I was going to die, I prayed. I have never been particularly religious, but I prayed. I asked God to send someone to save my baby. I did not even pray for myself, just for her. And then you appeared, like an answer to that prayer. I am no angel, Cade said roughly. No, Zelda agreed. You are better. You are real. She leaned her head against his shoulder, just as she had done that night in the mountains, and Cade felt his heart swell with an emotion too big to name. They sat like that until Grace woke and began to fuss, and the spell was broken. But something had shifted between them, some unspoken acknowledgement that what they felt was more than gratitude or circumstance. In March, Major Carson's men returned with news. They had found Thomas Kincaid's body and given him a proper burial. They had also tracked down 2 of the 4 outlaws who had killed him. The men were currently in custody, awaiting trial. The other 2 had apparently fled into Mexico and were beyond reach, at least for now. Zelda took the news with quiet dignity. She mourned in private, and Cade gave her space, though it pained him to stay away. But after a week, she sent him a message asking him to come visit. When he arrived at her door, she had been crying, her eyes red and swollen. But there was also a kind of peace in her face that had not been there before. It is real now, she said, holding Grace against her shoulder. Before, there was this part of me that kept thinking maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe Thomas was not really dead. Maybe he would appear one day and everything would go back to how it was supposed to be. But now I know for certain he is gone. He is not coming back. And I have to figure out how to move forward. You do not have to figure it out alone, Cade said carefully. Zelda looked at him, really looked at him, and Cade saw understanding dawn in her eyes. Cade, I know the timing is terrible, he said in a rush. I know you are still grieving, and I know it has not been very long, but I need you to know how I feel. I am in love with you, Zelda. I have been since that first day in the mountains, I think, and I am in love with Grace, too. I know I am not her father, and I would never try to replace Thomas in her life, but I love her like she is mine. I love you both like you are mine. Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. You foolish, wonderful man. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Cade asked, his heart in his throat. It is the best thing, Zelda said. She shifted Grace to one arm and reached out with the other hand to cup Cade's face. I love you too. I did not want to admit it, did not think I had the right to feel this way so soon. But I do. I love you, Kade Oliver. You have shown me more kindness and care than I knew existed in the world. You have given me hope when I thought there was none left. How could I not love you? Cade closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a kiss that was gentle and reverent and full of all the feelings he had been holding back. Zelda kissed him back with equal fervor, her free hand fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. Grace squirmed between them, protesting the confinement, and they broke apart with breathless laughter. We are going to have to get better at that, Zelda said, her eyes dancing with happiness. Without squishing the baby. We have time to practice, Cade said, and the promise in those words hung in the air between them. They were married in May, in a simple ceremony at the fort's chapel. Zelda wore a dress that the officers' wives had made for her, white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Cade wore his best shirt and pants, his hair slicked back, and his boots polished to a shine. Grace, now 4 months old and thriving, was held by Mrs. Patterson during the ceremony, cooing and gurgling happily. It was not a large wedding, but it was full of love. The entire fort turned out to celebrate, and the festivities lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing and more food than Cade had seen in one place in years. Zelda glowed with happiness, and Cade could not stop smiling, his face actually hurting from the unfamiliar expression. When they finally retired to the small house that Cade had built for them on the edge of the fort, he carried Zelda over the threshold while she laughed and protested that she was perfectly capable of walking. Grace was already asleep in the cradle that Cade had made with his own hands, lined with soft blankets and positioned where they could see her from the bed. Mrs. Oliver, Cade said, setting Zelda down gently and pulling her into his arms. I like the sound of that. So do I, Zelda said, tilting her face up to his, though I am keeping Kincaid as my middle name, for Thomas and for Grace. I think that is perfect, Cade said. He had never been jealous of Thomas Kincaid, had never felt threatened by his memory. The man had been Zelda's first love, Grace's biological father, and he deserved to be remembered and honored. They made love that night with tender care, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought sighs of contentment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, listening to Grace's soft breathing and watching the moonlight paint silver patterns on the floor. Do you ever think about that night? Zelda asked quietly. When you found us? All the time, Cade admitted. I think about how easily I could have missed you. If I had taken a different trail, if I had made camp earlier, if Banner had not smelled something and gotten nervous. So many little things that had to go exactly right for me to find you when I did. Fate, Zelda said, or providence, or dumb luck. Whatever it was, I'm grateful for it, Cade said. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Every single day I am grateful. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Cade continued to work at the fort, training horses for the cavalry and helping with the cattle that the post maintained for beef. Zelda began teaching lessons to the fort's children in the mornings, gathering them in the shade of a cottonwood tree and teaching reading and arithmetic and history. Grace grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and seemed to find joy in everything. Cade proved to be a devoted father. He sang to Grace in the evenings, teaching her silly songs he remembered from his own childhood. He carried her on his shoulders when they walked, letting her grab fistfuls of his hair and shriek with delight. He was patient when she cried, gentle when she was fussy, and completely besotted in a way that made Zelda's heart swell with love. You are going to spoil her rotten, Zelda said one evening, watching as Cade played peekaboo with Grace, the baby giggling uncontrollably every time his face appeared from behind his hands. That is my job, Cade said unrepentantly. I am her father. Fathers are supposed to spoil their daughters. Her father, Zelda repeated softly, and Cade looked up to find tears in her eyes. Is that all right? He asked quickly. I did not mean to overstep. It is more than all right, Zelda said. It is perfect. You are her father in every way that matters, Cade. She is lucky to have you. I am the lucky one, Cade said. He held out his free hand to Zelda, pulling her down to sit beside him on the floor. I have you both. I have a family. I never thought I would have that. Life was not always easy. There were hard times, lean times when money was tight and winter seemed to stretch on forever. There were days when Zelda grieved for Thomas, when the unfairness of his death hit her anew and she wept in Cade's arms. There were moments when Cade worried he was not enough, that he could not provide the life that Zelda and Grace deserved. But through it all, they had each other. They built a life together, piece by piece, day by day. They grew vegetables in a small garden behind their house. They attended church on Sundays and socialized with the other families at the fort. They celebrated Grace's first birthday with a cake that Zelda baked and gifts that the entire community contributed. On a cold January night in 1883, exactly 1 year after Cade had found Zelda on that frozen mountain trail, they stood together outside their home and looked up at the stars. Grace was asleep inside, watched over by Mrs. Patterson, who had offered to give them an evening to themselves. A year, Zelda said, leaning back against Cade's chest as his arms wrapped around her. Can you believe it has been a year? Best year of my life, Cade said simply. Mine too, Zelda said. Even with everything that happened. Even with all the pain and loss. This year has been the best of my life because of you. Cade turned her in his arms so they were facing each other. In the moonlight, she was breathtakingly beautiful, her face serene and happy. I want to give you more, he said. I want to give you a real house, not just these few rooms. I want to give you security and comfort. I want to give you everything you deserve. You already have, Zelda said, cupping his face in her hands. You have given me love. You have given me safety. You have given Grace a father and me a partner. What more could I possibly want? Brothers or sisters for Grace, Cade said, a little shyly. If you want them, if you are ready. Zelda's smile was radiant. I want them. I am ready. I want to fill our house with children and love and laughter. I want to grow old with you, Kade Oliver. I want all of it. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and hope and dreams into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zelda took his hand and led him back inside, where the warmth of their home and the promise of their future awaited. The seasons turned, bringing the bloom of spring wildflowers and the scorching heat of Arizona summer. Zelda discovered she was pregnant in April, and the news filled Cade with a joy so profound he could barely contain it. He became even more protective, if that was possible, hovering over Zelda and insisting she rest more, eat more, take better care of herself. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, amused by his nervousness. You do realize I have done this before, she teased him one evening, as he insisted on propping her feet up on a cushion. That was different, Cade said stubbornly. That was alone on a mountain. This time you have proper care. This time, nothing is going to go wrong. Nothing went wrong last time, Zelda pointed out. Grace is perfect. You could have died, Cade said, and his voice was raw with emotion. You nearly did die. I found you half frozen with your baby in your arms, and I have had nightmares about it ever since, about what would have happened if I had been an hour later, a day later, if I had not been there at all. Zelda pulled him down to sit beside her, taking his face in her hands. But you were there. You saved us. And now we are here, safe and happy, about to bring another child into this world. Do not torture yourself with what ifs. Focus on what is. Cade nodded, pressing his forehead against hers. I just love you so much. Both of you. All of you. I could not bear it if something happened. Nothing is going to happen, Zelda said firmly. Dr. Patterson says I am healthy as a horse. This baby is going to come into the world with a doctor present, in a warm house, with a father who loves him or her already. It is going to be completely different from Grace's birth. She was right. When their son was born in December of 1883, it was in their bedroom with Dr. Patterson attending and Cade holding Zelda's hand through every contraction. The birth was not easy, but it was safe, and when the baby boy finally emerged into the world with a lusty cry, Cade wept openly. A son, he said in wonder, looking at the tiny red-faced infant that Dr. Patterson placed in his arms. We have a son. What should we name him? Zelda asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. Cade looked down at the baby, at the small, perfect features and the tuft of dark hair. Thomas, he said softly, if that is all right with you. Thomas Cade, Oliver. So he carries both names. Zelda's eyes filled with tears. That is perfect. That is so perfect, Cade. Thank you. Grace, now nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by her baby brother. She would sit beside his cradle for hours, watching him sleep, gently touching his tiny hands. Cade loved watching his daughter with her brother, loved seeing the family they were building together. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another daughter came in 1885, whom they named Sarah. Then another son in 1887, whom they named James. Their little house expanded with additions that Cade built with his own hands, growing to accommodate their growing family. Zelda continued teaching when she could, and Cade's reputation as a horse trainer brought in steady income. But more than the physical growth of their family, it was the love that grew and deepened between Cade and Zelda that sustained them. They had started their relationship in the most traumatic of circumstances, but they had built something beautiful from that pain. They knew how to support each other through hard times because their entire relationship had been forged in hardship. They knew how to appreciate the good times because they had both experienced the worst. On Grace's 10th birthday in 1892, the whole family took a trip up into the mountains. It was summer, and the high country was green and lush, nothing like the frozen wasteland where Cade had found Zelda all those years ago. But Zelda had insisted she wanted to go back, wanted to show the children where their story had begun. They rode on horseback, Cade and Zelda and their 4 children, along with a pack mule carrying their camping supplies. When they reached the spot where Cade had found Zelda, she dismounted and stood silently for a long moment, looking at the old juniper tree. "This is where you were born," she said to Grace, who stood beside her holding Thomas's hand. "This is where I thought we were both going to die, and this is where your father found us and saved our lives." "Not your real father," Grace said matter-of-factly. She was old enough now to know the story, to understand that Thomas Kincaid had been her biological father and that he had died before she was born. "Your real father in every way that counts," Zelda corrected gently. "The man who raised you, who loves you, who has been there for every moment of your life. That is what makes a father real." Cade came to stand beside them, resting his hand on Grace's shoulder. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever met," he said. "And you have that same bravery in you. You come from strength, Grace. Never forget that." Grace looked up at him with eyes that were the same brown as her mother's. "I know, Papa. You tell me all the time. And I will keep telling you," Cade said with a smile, "until you are old and gray and sick of hearing it." They camped that night under the stars, and Cade told the children stories about the old days, about finding their mother and bringing her down the mountain. The kids listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard the stories 100 times before. There was something magical about hearing them here, in this place where it had all happened. Later, after the children were asleep in their bedrolls, Cade and Zelda sat by the dying fire and looked up at the stars, the same stars that had shone down on them that terrible, wonderful night a decade ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Cade asked quietly. "The way things happened? Everything you lost to get here?" Zelda was silent for a long moment before answering. "I regret that Thomas died. I regret that Grace never got to know her biological father. I regret the violence and the pain. But do I regret where I ended up? Do I regret you and our family and this life we have built together? Never, not for a single second." "I think about it sometimes," Cade admitted. "About how many things had to go wrong for you and how many things had to go right for me, all so that we could find each other. And I do not know if that makes me a terrible person, to be grateful for circumstances that caused you so much pain." "It does not make you terrible," Zelda said, taking his hand. "It makes you human. Life is complicated. Joy and sorrow get all tangled up together sometimes. We can honor what was lost while still celebrating what we found." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the mountain and the peaceful breathing of their sleeping children. "Thank you," Zelda said softly. "For what?" "For being exactly where I needed you to be, exactly when I needed you. For saving my life and Grace's life, for loving us when we had nothing to offer but ourselves, for building this beautiful life with me. For all of it." "Thank you," Cade echoed, "for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me a family and a purpose and a reason to wake up grateful every single morning." They kissed under the stars, and it was sweet and familiar, and still as electric as it had been the first time. After all these years, after all they had been through, the love between them had only grown stronger. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. The children grew up strong and healthy. Grace became a teacher like her mother, eventually opening a small school of her own in Fort Bowie. Thomas inherited Cade's way with horses and became a sought-after trainer. Sarah married a young officer and moved to California, though she visited often. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, determined to follow in Dr. Patterson's footsteps. Cade and Zelda grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines and wrinkles. But their love never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked. They still shared quiet conversations in the evening while watching the sunset. They still looked at each other with the same wonder and gratitude that had marked their early days together. On a warm spring evening in 1910, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Grace's three children were visiting for the week, and the sound of their laughter filled the air. Cade was 74 now, Zelda 60, and they had been married for 28 years. "We did all right," Cade said, reaching over to take Zelda's hand. "Did we not?" "We did better than all right," Zelda said, squeezing his fingers. "We did wonderfully." "I love you," Cade said, "every bit as much as I did that first day. More even. I did not know it was possible to love someone more over time, but I do." "I love you too," Zelda said, "with everything I am, with everything I have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, the same sky that had watched over them through all their years together, the same sky that had been there on that frozen mountain trail when Cade had found Zelda and Grace and changed all their lives forever. In the years that followed, they continued to build their legacy. They saw all their children married and happy. They welcomed more grandchildren and eventually even great-grandchildren. They became pillars of the Fort Bowie community, respected and beloved by all who knew them. Cade passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1918 at the age of 82. Zelda held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering her love and her gratitude for all the years they had shared. She followed him just 6 months later, as if unable to bear being without him for longer than that. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery at Fort Bowie, their headstones simple but bearing the inscription that Grace had chosen. Together in life, together in eternity, love never dies. Grace, now a grandmother herself at 46 years old, stood at their graves with her own children and grandchildren gathered around her. She told them the story she had heard so many times, the story of how her mother had given birth alone on a frozen trail and how her father had found them and brought them warmth, how love had bloomed in the most unlikely of circumstances, how two broken people had found each other and built something beautiful from their pain. "That is where we come from," Grace said to the youngest ones, who looked up at her with wide eyes. "We come from courage and love and hope against all odds. We come from two people who refused to give up, even when everything seemed lost. And that is the legacy they left us, not money or land or possessions, but the knowledge that love can triumph over anything, that family is everything, that every new day is a gift." The children nodded solemnly, even though they could not fully understand yet. But someday they would. Someday they would tell these stories to their own children and grandchildren, and the love story of Cade and Zelda would live on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. Years turned into decades, and the old fort at Fort Bowie was eventually decommissioned and fell into disrepair. But the descendants of Cade and Zelda spread throughout Arizona and beyond, carrying their story with them. Teachers and doctors, ranchers and business people, all of them connected by the thread of that one miraculous night when a cowboy found a woman and baby on a frozen trail and chose to save them. The story became a family legend, embellished with each telling, but always maintaining its core truth, a truth about love found in impossible circumstances, about choosing to care for strangers and finding family in the process, about the random moments of grace that can change everything if we are brave enough to embrace them. And somewhere in the fabric of the universe, in whatever comes after this life, Cade and Zelda were together, still holding hands, still grateful for that frozen January night that had brought them together, still marveling at the beautiful family and legacy they had created from the ashes of tragedy. Their love story had started in the worst possible way, with death and cold and desperation. But it had transformed into something transcendent, something that touched not just two lives, but countless lives across generations. It proved that even in the darkest moments, hope remains, that even when all seems lost, love can find a way. Grace had been right when Zelda named her. It was grace, pure and simple. The grace of being found, the grace of being loved, the grace of second chances and new beginnings, the grace that allows broken things to be made whole again. And in the end, that was the true legacy of Cade and Zelda Oliver. Not just their descendants, numerous as they were, but the reminder that love is worth fighting for, that families come in all forms, and that sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best days of your life if you are brave enough to keep going. The mountains of northern Arizona still stand, and sometimes in winter they are covered in snow. The trails are still there, though they are rarely traveled now. And if you knew where to look, you could still find that old juniper tree where Zelda gave birth to Grace, and where Cade found them both and brought them warmth. But more important than any physical marker are the stories that are still told, the love that still echoes down through the years, and the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, miracles happen, that sometimes a cowboy finds a woman and baby on a frozen trail, and instead of just saving their lives, he gives them a whole new life, a life filled with love and family and the kind of happiness that comes from choosing each other every single day, no matter what. That was the story of Cade and Zelda, a story of survival and salvation, of grief and renewal, of love found in the most unlikely of places with the most unlikely of people, creating something beautiful that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. And in the quiet moments, when Grace's descendants gathered together for holidays or celebrations, someone would always raise a glass and make a toast to Cade and Zelda, to the frozen trail and the cowboy who stopped, to the love that saved them all, to the reminder that family is not just about blood, but about who shows up when you need them most, about who chooses to love you, even when that love seems impossible. To Cade and Zelda, they would say, glasses raised high. May we all be so lucky in love. May we all find someone who will bring us warmth when we are cold. May we all have the courage to open our hearts, even after they have been broken. And somewhere, in whatever place holds the spirits of those who have passed, Cade and Zelda smiled, because their story had not ended with death. It lived on in every one of their descendants, in every act of kindness shown to strangers, in every choice to love despite the risk, in every new beginning born from the ashes of tragedy. They had given birth to more than just children. They had given birth to a legacy of love that would outlast them all. And that was the greatest gift they could have given the world, the reminder that love is always worth it, that showing up matters, that one person can make all the difference, that sometimes on a frozen trail in the mountains, a miracle happens. And if you are lucky enough to be part of that miracle, you hold on to it with everything you have. You nurture it and protect it and help it grow. You let it transform you into someone better than you were before. That was what Cade and Zelda had done. They had taken a moment of horror and transformed it into a lifetime of love. They had taken two broken people and made them whole. They had taken a baby born into the worst possible circumstances and given her a life filled with warmth and security and boundless love. And in doing so, they had proven that love is the most powerful force in the universe, more powerful than cold or death or despair, more enduring than stone or steel, more transformative than anything else humans can create. Their story was finished now, complete. But the love they had created continued on, rippling out through time and space, touching lives they would never know existed. And that was exactly as it should be, because true love never really ends. It just changes form, moving from generation to generation, from heart to heart, an eternal flame that cannot be extinguished, no matter how dark the night. Cade found Zelda on a frozen trail. He brought her warmth. She gave him purpose. Together, they built a life that mattered. And that life, that love, that choice to show up for each other every single day became the foundation upon which generations were built. In the end, it was a simple story: a cowboy and a widow and a baby born in the worst possible circumstances. But simple does not mean small. Sometimes the simplest stories are the ones that change everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that spread farther than we could ever imagine. That was the story of Cade and Zelda Oliver, a story of finding each other against all odds, a story of choosing love even when it seemed impossible, a story that proved beyond any doubt that love is always the answer, that family is everything, that showing up matters more than anything else. And somewhere in the mountains of northern Arizona, in the whisper of wind through juniper trees and the crunch of snow under boots, their story is still being told, still teaching, still inspiring, still reminding us all that love, true love, is the greatest gift we can ever give or receive. That was their legacy. That was their truth. And that was the ending to a story that began with despair, but ended with hope, began with loss, but ended with love, began with one person alone on a frozen trail, and ended with a family that would span generations. It was a good ending, the right ending, the only ending their story could have had, because from the moment Cade found Zelda and Grace on that trail, their story was always going to be about love, about choosing each other, about building something beautiful from the broken pieces life had left them. And they did. They built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that still echoes through the years, reminding us all that miracles happen, that second chances are real. That love, when we are brave enough to embrace it, can transform everything. That was the story. That was the truth. That was the legacy of the cowboy who found a woman and baby on a frozen trail and brought them warmth, a warmth that spread and grew and became something that would outlast them all. A warmth called love, a warmth called family, a warmth called home.